Hello and welcome back to The World This Week. I'm Matthew Ware, a student at Santa Monica High School and the anchor of this program. And now we'll look back at the world this week. Senate Bill 9 was recently signed into law by Governor Jerry Brown, ending life sentences without parole as a punishment for crimes committed by minors. Then, we'll have an exclusive interview with the Director of Education Advocacy at the Southern California ACLU, Brooks Allen, and a look at his recent discussion with members of the Santa Monica High School Human Rights Watch Student Task Force. The task force is a student-led organization that works towards educating people about their rights and advancing the cause of human rights on an international and local scale. We'll be back after this. We begin tonight with a step towards a more fair justice system in my home state. Governor Brown signed Senate Bill 9 into law on Sunday, September 30th, after our last episode was recorded, allowing prisoners who committed crimes when they were children to request another hearing to review their case after serving 25 years in prison. California used to condemn children who committed crimes when they were under 18 to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Unlike in some other states, life without parole really meant life without parole in California. We used to allow time off sentences for good behavior, but after several tough on crime bills were passed by public interest groups pushing referenda and the state legislature, more than 300 people who committed crimes when they were children had no possibility of ever leaving prison, regardless of how they behaved or whether they felt remorse. Human Rights Watch released this report about the situation. Its title is, "When They Die, They'll Send Me Home." Death was literally the only way these people could ever leave prison. Thousands of people, including students from my school, circulated petitions, spoke at meetings, and made phone calls to legislators, and the governor changed this. It's not the whole solution to a justice system that treats results, not causes, symptoms, not problems. But it's a step in the right direction, and I'm proud of my state for passing Senate Bill 9. Now for a bit of history. Not 100 years ago history, or even 50 years ago history, but something that's happened this last decade. On May 17, 2000, the American Civil Liberties Union, several civil rights groups, and independent attorneys filed the lawsuit Williams v. California. They argued that California, the 8th largest economy in the world, was failing to meet very basic needs of students, like having enough textbooks to study with or having functioning bathrooms, and that especially hurt students in low-income or minority neighborhoods where the schools received less funding. These photos were taken at schools involved in the lawsuit in 2000. This is the bathroom at Jefferson High School in Los Angeles. This is Luther Burbank Middle School near San Francisco. That's a water fountain. Here's the gym at Mark Keppel High School. The roof tiles were falling off the ceiling, so they had to shut it down. And the lockers at that same middle school. The case ended with a settlement in 2004. Here's Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger with Plaintiff Williams, who the case is named after. The state established new standards for education and schools, guaranteed $1 billion in new funds to meet those standards, and made every classroom in the state put up this notice. Have you seen it in your school? This has to be in every classroom in the state. And the complaint forms to address issues like missing textbooks and missing teachers. Every single classroom has to have this form. But 12 years after the Williams case, California still faces billions of dollars in cuts to education. And our state is ranked 50th out of all 50 states in class size and 46th out of all 50 states in spending per student. We sat down with Brooks Allen, Director of Education Advocacy at the Southern California ACLU, to talk about education in my state 12 years after Williams v. California. So good morning and welcome on The World This Week. So it's nearly the 12th anniversary of the case Williams v. California, and in the state of California right now we're looking at very severe budget cuts. We rank between 45th and 50th in the nation in many categories, including class sizes. Do you think the goals of the case have been met? And if they haven't, what's the situation now?
It's a really good question. I think that where we saw significant progress in the early years of Williams implementation, so between 2004 and say 2009, ever since 2009 we've been really challenged by the state budget cuts. And I think that while we certainly have met some of our targets, for instance, we have our standard for a textbook for every student and a good repair standard for facilities in place, and we're seeing more textbooks and more facilities being cured. We certainly face some really significant challenges with respect to this current state fiscal situation and the potential trigger cuts that could come after the election in November.
So what is your job and your role within the ACLU and with respect to Williams v. California?
So my title is I'm the Director of Education Advocacy for the ACLU of Southern California, and I help oversee the implementation of the Williams versus California settlement legislation across the state.
So you've been visiting schools in Southern California and around the state. Can you tell us what you've seen in these schools, the most interesting or most shocking things you've seen? Or
Yeah, I think the schools that we visit, we go out with county offices of education who visit those schools that are ranked in the lowest 3 deciles. So that is the lowest performing 30% of schools in the state. And they're looking to make sure that all students have books, and they're looking to make sure that the facilities are in good repair. And then they separately they do a review to ensure that the teachers are properly credentialed and assigned. And I think what we've seen is we've seen a lot of progress, I said, in the early years of Williams implementation. And I think more recently, we've seen and heard a lot of folks talk about the challenges, particularly on the facility side, of just dealing with day-to-day maintenance. A lot of folks talking on the textbook side about how difficult it is to get the book orders in place and having older books in place. Some of the more extreme examples in the early years, you'd visit schools where there's a school that, for instance, the entire electrical grid had gone down.
Wow.
They'd had real problems with electricity, problems with roof failures and other things that had to be addressed. But luckily, through these oversight systems and the funding that was made available for them, they were able to address those.
I know a lot of school districts, including this one here in Santa Monica, are really reluctant to expect further state funds, given all the cuts that have happened in the past, and are looking for ways to raise funds locally, either from city governments or from the parents of the schools. Is there a way that district can do that constitutionally and in compliance with Williams, and do you think that's a good direction?
Yeah, I think increasingly there's recognition that there has to be a strong level of local support to offset the state budget cuts. I think that just the reality of this, you even want to maintain the most basic programs that most of us expect are elements of a quality education. Local support is becoming more and more fundamental. But to your question, I think it really is raising serious questions about inequities that exist really from district to district, sometimes even within a district, in terms of where we have a system that becomes more dependent on local resources. Do we start returning to the situation we had before our Serrano v. Priest decisions in the 70s that tried to equalize funding across the state? Because if the state base, the level of state funding is so low that really you're talking about potentially if Proposition 30 doesn't pass, a school year of 160 days for some school districts. And where other districts may have a school year of 180 days, they maintain our current school year because of local funds. That means those students in those two districts have a difference of a month of schooling difference, even before we get into the programs. And I think that will pose some very serious constitutional questions for us if we reach that point.
So in your view, the role of the state is equalization of funding, or should provide the majority of funding?
Yeah, frankly, it's not even my view. It's the California Supreme Court has held that the California Constitution provides for a fundamental right to education for all children in California, and that the equal protection clauses of the California Constitution require a basic equality of educational opportunities across all schools. And the state is the ultimate party responsible for ensuring that there is that basic equality of educational opportunity. And so whether that comes from ensuring a certain equality of funding, or whether that comes from other measures to ensure through Williams, for instance, that there's equal educational opportunities by ensuring adequate and sufficient textbooks and facilities and properly trained teachers. The state has a very critical role to play. And I think that right now we have a governor who recognizes the importance of the state providing a role in providing equitable funding, and that's why he's been pushing for his weighted student pupil formula. And I think that all indications are the governor is going to make that proposal again and further refining that. I think that's going to be a critical
What is the weighted formula?
Yeah, the weighted pupil formula is an approach to simplifying education funding in California. Without getting into all the details, because it's very complex, you can go online to EdSource and others to see how it's done. But essentially right now there's lots of different streams of funding that come to schools, oftentimes with strings attached. And the idea is to try to simplify this and allow folks at the local level to make decisions, but to provide additional funds for those students who might need additional services. So for instance, English language learners and others who will need interventions, more dollars should come for each one of those students. And so the idea is to try to equalize funding and make it more equitable using that type of approach.
Finally, what advice would you have for students here and students in schools around the state that want to become more involved in advocacy for education and educational equality?
Yeah, absolutely. I think absolutely critical that students make their voices heard, and that means you have to learn, right? You have to do your research, and you have to learn about all the things that we're talking about today. What are the current issues? But I think it starts with having a fundamental sense in your gut of what's right and wrong, and where you see there might be a problem, try to learn more about it. Speak up, organize, speak to other students, speak to members of the community, and figure out how you can find your voice. And then reach out to organizations like ours at the ACLU and others that are anxious to hear from students. And we can then help connect you to have your voices heard both at a local level through your local school board, as well as through your local state and federal representatives, and ultimately make sure that your voices are heard, whether in the boardroom or in Sacramento, where some of the most critical decisions affecting students are made.
Well, thanks so much. Thanks so much for your time and for coming on the show.
Great. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
You too.
That's all for The World This Week. Thanks for watching, and be sure to check out our website, worldthisweek.org, and like us on Facebook at facebook.com/worldthisweeksamohigh. Until next time.